Hey everyone, this is Nick Lalonde, your host of What's Next, making your third act your best act. Today you're going to hear from technology guru Mark Vena. Mark is the CEO and principal analyst of Smart Tech Research and has been featured in Forbes, Business Today, Tech News World, New York Times, Discovery, USA Today, Wall Street Journal, and NBC News. What I found most interesting about my conversation with Mark is that he tells people he's going to retire in 2 to 3 years, but he doesn't actually believe it. He's found success in running his own business and podcast after leaving corporate America 5 years ago, which made him rethink work entirely. With the ability to work remote and to do his podcasting and writing anywhere in the country, he's not so sure if he's ever going to retire. Make sure you listen in though, as Mark starts to reference an old movie as to why he believes staying active is so important. I hope that you'll enjoy this conversation with Mark as much as I did. So Mark, one of the things that stuck out to me is you own your own podcast and you run that. It's called the Smart Tech Podcast, correct?
Smart Tech Check.
The Smart Tech Check. So tell me about that.
Yeah, that's the name for it. My company's called Smart Tech Research, capital T. It's one word, capital S, capital T. And then, I coined Smart Tech Check a few years ago. The podcast has gotten over 3 million views, which is great. I mean, I spend money promoting it, but, I don't think I would have gotten the views unless the content, now, unfortunately, I wish I was making, lots and lots of revenue off I make revenue off the podcast by charging a client to be on the podcast, which most of them will happily pay for. But, as you know, there are influencers on YouTube that get paid, but you have to have like 20 million views a week. I mean, I'm not in that Kim Kardashian category. So I don't really generate revenue from the podcast. The revenue I get is from charging clients to be on the podcast.
Okay. And then you started your own company after spending 20 years in corporate America. Started it about 5 to 6 years ago. Does that sound right?
That's correct.
Yeah. And what prompted you to start your company?
A friend of mine started doing what I'm doing. He started it about 9 or 10 years ago, a guy that I worked with at Compaq years ago. When I left my last company, he said, hey, why don't you do something if you're not doing anything? And, you know how it works. You leave a company and then you wait for another opportunity to come along. And I didn't want to be idle for very long. So literally within a few weeks, I started doing it and I kind of liked it. So I was doing the work for him in his company as kind of a freelancer contractor. And then about 2-3 years after that, I said, I could do this by myself, because every time I would get paid, he'd get a cut, so it was one of these things that, hey, why can't I get 100% versus 80%? So, but yeah, so I mean, it does take a bit of courage, I think, to do it, because so many people, when they get into their 40s or 50s, and I think all they could do is work for corporate America and get a check every couple of weeks. And, I saw that a lot of other people were able to make that segue. And, honestly, it's worked out. Now, there was, it takes a lot of building up. It requires a specific skill set. Just because people are great marketing people or great business people, that doesn't necessarily translate to writing. I know a lot of senior people that I have tremendous respect for. They've been incredibly successful, but they can hardly write a 3-paragraph email, let alone 1,000 words on something that's timely that you got to get published, every week. Either you self-publish it or you work with a publisher like I do to promote your content. So that's been a bit of a, I think that takes a little bit of courage. And the social media angle that I mentioned before. I mean, let's face it, if you're 20 or 30, you're probably comfortable with, social media posts and all the challenges that go along with it. It's not difficult. But a lot of people are a little scared of social media. They think that, and they're right. It really doesn't happen in the business world. There are toxic people that operate on Twitter and will say awful things about people from a business standpoint. But it's not as bad as it is in a political, God forbid, where you make a statement that, hey, I support this group, and all of a sudden you get attacked. And some really awful stuff that can be said. That really doesn't happen on the business side for the most part. So famous last words, I'll say that, and someone will go crazy. But Yeah, so I think some people, people in their 40s and 50s, they struggle with social media. Their kids are probably more comfortable with social media because kids feel that they're invulnerable. They can say anything, which is bad, by the way. I'm not a fan of that. But my generation, the baby boom generation, they're just not comfortable with that. So that requires, and by the way, learning something brand new, so a lot of people are comfortable with that. But I've been able to make that segue, and I'm very fortunate that I invested my money properly. I saved a lot of money. When I see articles that I see from time to time where, and you probably have even better data, where you see the average person at 50 or 55 has $100,000 saved, or 200, some number that I consider. I mean, what the hell have you been doing for the last 30 years? They haven't invested in a 401k plan. Maybe they were not lucky enough to get stock options, and not everybody is has that opportunity. But here's my thing. If people, and this because you're in the financial investment firm, and I do have a financial advisor that's been able, he's a good friend of mine who's done a terrific job for me, lifelong friends. He's done a great job. And the fact of the matter is, if people are waiting for Social Security to bail them out, I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm trying to delay taking. I don't need Social Security. I mean, I do. I would like to. I don't need it. I could probably live without it. But the reality is, hey, I put money into the plan. I'd like to get a payout. I think I deserve that. But even when I look at the actual, the payout tables, if I take money, I might get my payment in the, call it in the 4 or 5. When does it pay full out? When you're 66?
Yeah, it depends on your age. It's between 66 and 67.
Right. Yeah. So let's say what? Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to go back to the transition from corporate America to having your own company. You've had your own company now for 5 to 6 years. It sounds like you felt comfortable in making this transition because you really saved quite a bit of money. I know back when you were in corporate America in the late 2000s, you said you were making killer money, right?
Yeah. Right.
Maybe even a little bit more than today. But today affords you a different lifestyle than you had in the 2000s. So you run your own company, you don't answer to anyone. You have this podcast that you can do remote. And so one of the things that stuck out to me before we started recording and having our conversation here is you said, Nick, I tell everybody I'm going to retire in 2 to 3 years, but I enjoy what I do. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, it's a contradiction. I don't think, most of my family, and take my family out of it, but most of my friends, when they, there were still a lot of them are still working for corporate America. When they retire, they will retire. They will not, I don't think they'll do what I chose to do. I mean, part of the reason why I like what I do, Nick, is that I like the mental stimulation of it. When you're in the technology field where everything is different every day, there's something different in the news, whether it's Sam Altman getting fired from OpenAI and then getting rehired by Microsoft, I'm sorry, getting hired back by his old company an hour later. I mean, that's all soap opera stuff, but it has a vitality that's very exciting, and I love technology. I love consumer, I like playing with it. I've built computers in the past. I've done a lot of interesting work. If you look at my background, where I'm comfortable getting my hands dirty, opening up, I can build a computer. Not that I don't, it doesn't make sense to do that anymore because the costs have come down so dramatically. But I'm very comfortable with technology, and this allowed me to make this segue. Now, the other thing I didn't mention is that since I run my own company, and I sometimes leverage other social media resources that help me out, that I pay them for to do some stuff for me. I'm my own guy, and when I do my podcasting, I have to do a lot of the video editing work because the video work. I've loved video editing since probably for 20 years. Just as a kind of I love doing that. I love doing. I'm fascinated with the movies. The tools that you have available today to yourself are unbelievable. The amount of power that you can have with a MacBook or a Windows PC and a decent iPhone, it's stuff that Steven Spielberg couldn't even have dreamt of 25 years ago, but it requires a talent, and I'm not saying I'm Steven Spielberg, so don't get the wrong impression, but, if we did a video interview right now, I could edit and turn that video around that would look pretty professional, probably in about 30 minutes, 45 minutes, because I've done it 500 times, you know. Other people trying to do what I do would have to hire someone, they'd have to get someone to do it, and that may not be cost effective, and, you know, you got to turn stuff around. So, you know, I was very lucky that the pieces were in place that when I made this decision, it was a relatively easy decision to make, you know. And by the way, you know, I had, you know, put together a pretty good portfolio together. It says, you know what, if it doesn't work out, if I end up, you know, failing at it, for lack of a better word, I'm not going to starve, you know. I mean, I've been, you know, now, if I had, at, you know, 60 years old, if I had $100,000 in assets, I'm not even counting my house. If that's an asset, but you can't, you know, you can't buy things with your, you know, with the assets of your house unless you do a reverse mortgage, which I'm not crazy. That's crazy. But my point is that I was in a comfortable enough position to take a chance, you know, and it worked out for me. A lot of people may not be in that same, you know, in that same position.
Do you mind if we go back? You mentioned, Nick, it is a contradiction. I love what I do, but I tell people I'm going to retire in 2 to 3 years. So why do you tell people 2 to 3 years?
I just want to lie. No, it's not that. Because I think my generation, for lack of a better phrase, versus the prior generation, versus the current generation, when you say retire, that has a connotation with it, and that connotation is not a good connotation. That connotation is you're gonna, you know, have grandkids on your knee. You're gonna, you know, do all the kinds of things that there's a stereotype around in terms of what retirees do. So honestly, I probably will stop doing that. I mean, I generally say, when I say it, I always put the caveat probably in front of it, you know, which gives me an out, frankly. But again, you know, I'm just, you know, being very candid with you. I don't think I'll ever, you know, classically retire because I like what I do, you know. Now, I may just end up doing maybe one podcast a month, and maybe I get paid for it, maybe I don't. You know, I like to write, you know, and again, writing is a skill, and not too many people have that. But you're right, it is a contradiction, because I guess, you know, when I'm talking to my friends or family members, you know, some of them are already planning to retire, and you're like, well, what, you know, what am I going to miss out on? And the fact of the matter is, I don't think I miss out on anything. You know, I just don't want to be in a position where your brain starts to atrophy because you're not doing something that you're engaged with. And I'm very lucky in that regard. You know, I really like what I do.
Have you seen that in other people where they stop being engaged?
Oh,
and
yeah.
their brain starts to atrophy?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. There's a, you know, it would take me 20 minutes to walk you through, but there was a movie made in the early 70s called A New Centurion. And I saw it when I was a kid. And it was written about two cops in Los Angeles. It was written by a former LA cop named Joseph Wambaugh. And he was a very successful cop that became a writer. And I won't tell you the whole plot, but there's in the movie, you should go see the movie. It's like, you could probably watch it online. The senior cop was played by George C. Scott, one of the great actors in the late 50 years. He retires, and all I will tell you, just very quickly, it'll take me a minute to tell you, he retires, and midway through the movie, he kind of goes a separate way, and the younger cop that he was hooked up with, you know, syncs up with him in about 6 months after he retires. And there's a scene in the movie where it's all shot from the point of view of the older cop, from George, and the camera's behind him. And the younger cop, hey, what are you doing? And he goes, oh, you know, retirement life is great. I hang out with my grandkids. I play golf once a week. And, you know, he's having this kind of perfunctory conversation. And the cop on the phone says, oh, well, we got to grab lunch. You know, I haven't talked to you in 6 months. Yeah, we got to do that. Say hello to the boys for me. And he hangs up the phone. He reaches into his desk, pulls out a gun, and shoots himself and kills himself. And the implication is that he couldn't move, he couldn't transition from this crazy life as a cop in LA to being a retiree. Now, that's an extreme scene. I'm not telling, that would never happen to me, but it had such a riveting effect on me that that's what happens when you make that segue, you know, from a always going on to something going, you know, you got something, and all of a sudden you go from 100 miles an hour to 5 miles an hour, And now, again, that's very melodramatic, but that gives you my
Mhm.
perspective, where I'm coming from on retiring.
What a great example. And I actually see that a lot with high achievers. They have a hard time going. It's like getting off the Autobahn, right?
Yes,
On going from 100 miles per hour to zero overnight is definitely a challenge, I would say.
yes.
So I'm curious, you mentioned that you get a lot of mental stimulation out of work. What else does work provide you outside of money and financial security?
Well, in these, these engagements that I get, I'm very lucky. I mean, when I like, for example, last week I was at I don't know if you know a company called MediaTek. They're kind of a poor man's version of Qualcomm. They supply probably 95% of the chips that go into smartphones outside of Samsung, which is a pretty big
Mm,
market. And they do other things as well. They're in automobiles. They're technology ingredients that go into other. You probably have products in your house that have a MediaTek chip in
mm,
them in some way. And they had a big event, and these events, these companies, they spare no expense. We were at the Ritz Carlton in Laguna Niguel last week, which is not a bad place to stay at. And they wine and dine you every night. You get it. There's a couple of hundred people that go to they're invited, and I'm one of them that goes to these meetings. You get a chance to spend one-on-one time with the CEO, with the senior team, and of course they want to present themselves in the most polished way they can, so you write nice things about them. There's a lot of fun associated with that, and you kind of feel important, even though they're using you to a degree because they want to leverage your influence. But Qualcomm does this, Intel does this, MediaTek does this, because this influencer thing has really become a thing. So even though I'm a technology analyst classically, the reality is you're kind of an influencer, because they want to
mm.
present their best story to you, so you say nice things about them in the press or a podcast.
Wow. So sounds like you get mental stimulation. Sounds
Yes.
like the whining and dining. I mean, sounds like really fabulous experiences. Is there anything else that comes to mind that work provides you outside of money and financial security?
Uh, the other thing, which is not an insubstantial tangible, is that these companies generally put you on, they put you on some type of NDA list, and they'll brief you about things that are coming down the road. So it's kind of what you talk about being special.
Mm-hmm.
Those are their roadmap. Okay, we're going to come out with these chips 6 months from now that will be designed into products that show up a year later. So you kind of get an insight into what's coming down the pipe that the general public doesn't get. And that also works with products as well. I mean, a company will brief,
Mm-hmm.
oh, we're coming out with these new, like, for example, I have a call with Netgear, which is a very popular manufacturer of routers. They're coming out with new routers probably at the CES timeframe. They're going to brief me on it. And by the way, what's nice too? I should have mentioned this up front. You get a lot of toys. You get a lot. I've been doing a lot of housekeeping, but there are times when my house looks like Best Buy, because they send you samples of stuff, and they don't want them back because they can't, once you open the box, they can't sell them. So I mean, it's unbelievable the amount of crap that you get. It's not crap. I shouldn't say that. It's
What's
not
the
crap.
best toy
But,
that you've gotten?
oh, I have. Well, just recently. I get computers up the yin yang. I right on my desk right now, I've got a 45-inch widescreen display that HP sent me, which is fantastic. I use it on my podcast. It's a tremendous productivity device, but very often I'm giving stuff that I have to other people because I just don't have room for it.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like this role that you play in the tech space is really important, and you have a lot of influence, and therefore, these companies throw a lot at you in
They
order to
do.
garner that influence.
They do, and but you're in constant sell mode. You're constantly, because I'm not the only one who does what I do. I won't say there's 10,000 people that do what I do, but it's probably, call it 300 or 400 people industry wide that do
Mm-hmm.
what I do. And companies can't afford to do business with everyone. So, but there's enough revenue and there's enough money that if you become insulated with the company itself, there's generally business that you can go off and chase. And truth be told, I mean, I don't wake up in the morning, okay, I got to send out 20 proposals to get some business. I engage when I feel like engage, so it's not that I'm lazy. It's just that I don't have to, again, going back to the financial position I'm in a position where I don't have to chase every Tom, Dick, and Harry for business, if that makes sense.
So let's say you did retire in 2 to 3 years, like you tell your friends and family members. What else would you miss about work?
I probably would miss the toys. I'd probably miss all these toys. That's probably one reason I probably don't want to do it. I kind of like getting all this stuff,
Yeah. So if you won the lottery tomorrow, that would afford you the ability to stay at all the nicest places that you're being put up at. It would give you enough money to pay for all the toys. Would you still do what you do?
That's a very good question. The only thing in my life, and I told this to someone, I've told this to a couple of people, the only thing I have lacking in my life, if you want to be my psychotherapist for 30 seconds, is I would love to have a private jet. I mean, I drive a nice car. I never not go to a restaurant because it's too expensive. I mean, I live, I think, within my means, but I'm pretty lucky, in that regard. The one thing I would love to have is I'd love to have access to a private jet or maybe a timeshare thing, and it's just not affordable. It doesn't make economic sense. I've looked at those timeshare flight things, and they're ridiculously expensive. Having even access to a timeshare private jet is ridiculously expensive. But what's nice about it is that you don't have to do what I'm doing for Christmas. I don't have to fly on Southwest from California to Nashville to Savannah, where it's going to take me 12 hours to fly across the country. I could just call, hey, I want to fly right now from San Jose Airport. I don't want to go through security, and I can be there in 5 hours. That would be nice to have, but other than that, I feel like I'm pretty blessed,
How much money do you think it would take to have a private jet?
Oh, I think a timeshare private, or actually own a private jet.
Yeah, the timeshare or owning it.
Oh, I think I'm pretty sure that a good private jet is, I'm going to make a number up. It's probably a couple of $1 million. And then, by the way, you got to pay for the pilot, you got to pay for the maintenance, you got to pay for the hangar. You got to have some serious net wealth. I would probably have to double my net wealth to really make it worth my while. I probably wouldn't do that. If I had another $1 million of net wealth and assets, I probably would consider the timeshare thing. Because that probably is, I'm making a number up, but you probably would need a couple $100,000 a year for that to make sense, but that would be a perk. I mean, that would be absolutely, but I'm not, the operative thing when you're investing money and you're protecting your savings. And by the way, the other thing that's on people's minds, as you probably know, the last 2 or 3 years have been painful from an inflation standpoint. So I'm constantly thinking, if inflation, let's say inflation's been running at roughly 10%. I know it's come down, but it's still not great. It's still not at the 2%, rate that it was under the former administration. You got to say to yourself, it's probably going to be another 2 or 3 years before it gets back into that 2% range. So then you say to yourself, how do you make up for that? And so hence why I'm probably going to work for a few more years, because I just don't, I don't want to start cutting into my, I don't want to start having to sell stock and sell bonds and other assets that I have to pay for my lifestyle. Right now, the key thing to investing is reinvesting, and so I think a lot of the things that you'll probably get from people you speak with is how have the last 3 years changed their investment strategies,
So it sounds like you never really plan on retiring. You could do what you do for the rest of your life. So if we're being honest, in the next 10 years, are you podcasting? I think you mentioned you would scale it back to maybe once a month. And then how often are you writing? What does that look like from a work perspective?
So, I write probably a couple times a week. I try to do 2 podcasts a week. So it's 8 podcasts a month. Not all those are paid for, but it's a lot of work that goes behind that. Like, for example, I'm going to do a podcast tomorrow with a guy that I do a regular podcast with. there's a technology reporter with the Houston Chronicle that texted me this morning. He wants to do a podcast. So we're going to do one on Friday. But there's a lot of work that goes into it. I mean, now I'm pretty proficient at it that I can turn this stuff around pretty quickly. But, maybe I, get down, remember the only way that the podcast works is that you get your word out, and when I do a podcast, even if I'm not paid for it, it's word of mouth, when you go into YouTube, look up Smart Tech Check, one word, and my podcast is free to subscribe to, and you can see some of the podcasts that I've done. You can see all the podcasts.
So how are you filling that additional free time that you're going to have when you do scale back over the next potentially 5 to 10 years?
I don't know. I mean, I really haven't thought about it. I would probably do a lot, like I said before, I probably would, make up some of it, probably with travel, doing things I've never contemplated, like, for example, driving across the country, maybe taking a special person, someone I'm dating or involved with. But that's a serious commitment of time, to take a week or two to drive across the country. I'd love to do that, parts of America that I haven't seen. In my life, I've been very lucky I spent much of my business career traveling to Asia. God knows I've been to Asia probably 3,000 times, not 3,000, but I bet I've been to Asia, Taiwan, China, Japan for roles that I've had. I probably have done 250 trips across the country, across to Asia, probably another 100 trips or so to Asia, to Europe, but always for work, never for, hey, let's go to, I probably would default more to Europe than I would for China for sightseeing, because I'm much more in tune with European history. But yeah, I mean, I'm the kind of guy that would probably would go to London, because I love the theater so much, and I'd park my rear end there for 2 or 3 weeks and do nothing but go to the theater every night, because London has such great theater.
Well, it sounds incredible. Sounds like some more travel, maybe theater.
Yeah.
Would you change where you live by chance? Would you move from San Francisco, which is
Yeah, so that is definitely on the roadmap right now. I probably would have done that earlier, but then COVID hit. I'm still trying to assess, whether being in the Bay Area has an advantage for me. So far, it hasn't. I mean, there are clients that will call me and say, hey, I'm in San Francisco, let's meet, but it's not a showstopper, I'm probably going to wait another 6 months to kind of benchmark that to see if, hey, if that's holding me up, because, like I've had my place for 16, 17 years. I have a lot of equity in my place. The place has gone up in value by about 50%. That's great. But the problem in California, as you know, is that if I were to sell my property right now with interest rates at 7%, not great time to take out a mortgage. I refinanced my existing place 2 years ago at the height of the low rates, and my monthly mortgage is $1,500 a month. I mean, it's like rent. I mean, it's insane for me to I mean, unless I bought a place in cash, which I could, but that would necessitate leaving California, because I can't buy the same place I have right now. I would love to get a newer place, maybe a little bit bigger, not tremendously bigger, but maybe a little bit bigger. Ain't gonna happen in California. So by default, I got to figure out what my next game plan is. So I probably would do something, probably look at maybe Arizona, maybe Las Vegas, of all places, Las Vegas, places that have low cost of living, and, maybe Texas. I lived in Texas for 16 years when I worked for Compaq and Dell. So I'm very familiar with Texas. Dallas is a fine place too.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I'm a little biased.
No, I love Texas. My favorite Tex-Mex restaurant. They're in Dallas. There's one in Austin. There's several in San Jose, in Houston. It's Papacitos. The best.
Yeah,
Tex-Mex.
that's so good.
Love it. The Papa family.
Even though you're a New York Giants fan, we would still welcome you with open arms.
Thank you. I'll keep that in mind if I decide to make the decision to move.
Well, Mark, this has been a ton of fun today. I do have one last question for you.
I hope this was helpful. This was an enjoyable conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really took away a lot from our conversation today. Last question that I have for you, though, is knowing what you know now, is there anything that you would have done differently in your career?
Yeah, you know what? I had been, I moved out to California. My first, I've been out here for 17 years when I was 40, 43, again, and I wish I had moved out to California because I had a couple of opportunities when I was working for Compaq. I think that if I had moved out here when I was 30, who knows how your life might have gone, I mean, I talked to people who, came out here, they ended up working for Apple or for Google in the salad days when they were getting stock. I mean, there are people out here, as you know, that came out here to find their fortune. They were good from an experience standpoint. That would have been should have been my, hindsight's 2020, but I wish I had moved out here earlier.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Well, it sounds like you may even be switching coasts here soon, though. So retire for your career, the West Coast sounded great, and then for retiring, maybe the East Coast suits you a little better.
Sounds good. Well, thank you for your time. I appreciate it, Nick.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Have a great rest of your day. Okay.